My name is Rachel Brooks. When my grandfather died, my mother cried harder than anyone else in the room. She clung to his coffin. She told everyone she had lost her best friend. She even fainted for a few seconds during the funeral. People called it heartbreak. I called it anticipation because my grandfather, Walter Brooks, owned over $4 million in assets, a paid-off ranch, several investment accounts, rental properties, and everyone assumed my mother, Linda, would inherit everything. She assumed it too. For 2 weeks after the funeral, she walked around acting like she had already become wealthy. She looked at luxury SUVs online. She started talking about remodeling her kitchen. She even told my father that retirement was finally going to be easy. Then came the meeting with Grandpa's attorney. My mother walked into the conference room wearing black designer clothes she couldn't actually afford. She smiled politely at everyone. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Your grandfather always knew I'd take care of this family." I smiled back. I didn't answer, because something had been bothering me for years. Ever since I was a teenager, money kept disappearing. Not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Grandpa had quietly paid our mortgage twice, paid my college tuition himself, covered my father's medical bills after his back surgery. Yet somehow my parents were always struggling. My mother always had an explanation: unexpected expenses, bad economy,
repairs,
medical bills, taxes. There was always something. Grandpa never argued. He simply wrote another check. When I was 23, I asked him why. He smiled sadly. Because sometimes helping someone isn't the same as trusting them. I didn't understand what he meant. Not until that meeting. The attorney waited until everyone sat down. Then he opened a thick leather folder. My name is Thomas Reed. I represented Walter Brooks for nearly 25 years. He looked directly at my mother. Mr. Brooks left very specific instructions. My mother smiled. I know Dad liked everything organized. Thomas nodded. He certainly did. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Not toward my mother. Toward me. The room went completely silent. My mother laughed nervously. "I think that's supposed to come to me." Thomas calmly shook his head. "No." "Is addressed to Rachel Brooks." My father frowned. "That has to be a mistake." "It isn't." Thomas waited until I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone." Which means your mother believes she inherited my estate. She didn't. I need you to know why. Please let Thomas finish before you speak. "Love, Grandpa." My stomach tightened. Thomas opened another folder, much thicker this time. "Over the last 12 years, he began, Walter Brooks transferred approximately $412,000 to Linda Brooks." My mother smiled confidently. "Dad helped us a lot." Thomas nodded.
yes,
"He did." He pressed a button on the projector. Bank statements appeared. Casino withdrawals, sports betting deposits, online gambling sites, luxury boutique purchases, designer handbags, weekend spa resorts, 5-star hotel stays. None of it matched the reasons she had given Grandpa. The room became so quiet I could hear the air conditioner. Thomas continued. "Nearly 70% of the financial assistance Walter provided was never used for family expenses. It was spent on gambling and luxury purchases." My father slowly turned toward my mother. "What?" His voice cracked.
is this?
Linda immediately stood. "Those records are incomplete." Thomas calmly clicked another slide. "Credit card statements, casino loyalty memberships, VIP player rewards, private gambling invitations." The dates stretched back over a decade. My father looked physically sick. I thought. He swallowed. "I thought we couldn't afford Rachel's college because medical bills buried us," Thomas quietly answered. "Walter Brooks paid every hospital bill directly." My father looked back at my mother. "So where did the money go?" Linda opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Thomas wasn't finished. There is another reason Mr. Brooks changed his estate. He reached into the folder again. Approximately 3 years ago, Linda attempted to convince Walter to refinance his ranch. My mother immediately interrupted. It was just paperwork. Thomas ignored her. The loan application listed Walter's ranch as collateral. The projector changed again. There it was. Her signature. Grandpa's shaky signature beside it. And one note written by Grandpa himself across the top. I believe Linda thinks I no longer understand what I'm signing. I understand perfectly. I simply no longer trust her. The date was circled. It was 2 days after Grandpa had been discharged from the hospital. The same week, he'd briefly forgotten my birthday. My father buried his face in his hands. Linda finally exploded. He promised me. He promised everything would be mine. Thomas folded his hands. No. He promised your daughter. Everyone stared at him. Thomas smiled slightly. Rachel has no idea what I'm about to say. He was right. I didn't. 5 years ago, Walter established an irrevocable family trust. It contains the ranch, the investment accounts, the rental properties, and approximately $2.8 million. My breathing stopped. The trust names Rachel Brooks as sole trustee. Linda actually laughed. That's ridiculous. Thomas shook his head. There are conditions. Linda will always have housing. Her medical expenses will always be covered. Reasonable living expenses will always be paid. But she will never again have direct access to the family's money. The room exploded. Linda screamed. She called Grandpa cruel, manipulative, controlling. Then she pointed at me. This is your fault. I stared at her. My fault? You poisoned him against me. I slowly looked at Thomas. Did I even know this trust existed? No, never. I looked back at my mother. So how exactly did I manipulate him? For the first time in years, she had no answer. Thomas waited until the silence settled. No one spoke. My father was still staring at my mother, not with anger, with confusion, like he had just realized he'd been living beside a stranger for nearly 30 years. Thomas picked up a remote from the conference table. Mr. Brooks also left a video. He instructed me to play it if Linda ever challenged the trust. My mother stood so quickly, her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. No, I don't want to watch this. Thomas met her eyes. I'm afraid that decision was never yours to make. The television flickered to life. Grandpa looked thinner than I remembered. His shoulders had slumped. His hands shook slightly in his lap, but his voice was exactly the same. Calm, steady, certain. Hello. If you're watching this, then I'm gone. The room became completely still. Grandpa looked straight into the camera. Rachel, if you're seeing this, I'm sorry. Tears immediately filled my eyes. I never wanted to leave you with this responsibility, but there isn't anyone else I can trust to protect this family. My mother scoffed. Protect us? Thomas didn't even glance in her direction. Grandpa continued. For many years, I believed Linda every time she asked for help. The mortgage, the hospital, Robert's surgery, Rachel's tuition. There was always another emergency. He smiled sadly, and every time, I wrote another check. My father slowly lowered his head. Grandpa folded his hands together. Then, one afternoon, I received the same hospital bill for the second time. The room shifted. I assumed there had been a clerical error, so I asked my accountant to investigate. Thomas quietly placed another folder on the table. This is the report. Grandpa looked away from the camera for a moment. When he returned, he didn't bring answers. He brought evidence. The television switched to scanned documents, casino player cards, ATM withdrawals, luxury hotel invoices, designer boutique receipts, sports betting deposits, cruise reservations, everything dated, everything documented, everything paid for with money Grandpa believed was saving our family. My father whispered. My surgery. Grandpa nodded. Robert? I paid every hospital invoice directly. I have the receipts. So if anyone ever told you there wasn't enough money left afterward, they lied. My father's breathing became uneven. He turned toward my mother. You told me. We had to cancel Rachel's college fund because we couldn't recover financially. Linda didn't answer. She couldn't. Grandpa looked directly into the camera again. I don't believe Linda ever wanted to become this person. I believe addiction happened one decision at a time. First $50, then $100, then $500. Eventually, the lies became easier than telling the truth. My mother wiped tears from her face. Please stop. Grandpa continued anyway. I forgave the gambling. I even forgave the lies. When I couldn't forgive was what happened 3 years ago. Thomas opened yet another folder. The room held its breath. Inside was a refinance application. Grandpa's ranch, listed as collateral. Linda's signature, Grandpa's signature, and across the top, written in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. I believe Linda thinks I no longer understand what I'm signing. She is mistaken. The date made my stomach drop. 2 days after Grandpa had been discharged from the hospital. The same week he'd forgotten my birthday for the first time. My father covered his face with both hands. Linda suddenly shouted, "He promised me. He told me everything would eventually be mine." Thomas calmly answered before Grandpa could. "No. He promised something very different." Grandpa smiled softly. "I promised myself that I would never let addiction destroy another generation of this family." He looked straight at the camera again. "Rachel, there's something you don't know. I didn't choose you because you're my favorite. I chose you because I watched you. I watched the little things. The neighbor whose fence you repaired after the storm. The elderly widow whose groceries you carried every Friday. The Christmas presents you secretly bought for children whose parents couldn't afford them. And not once, did you ever ask me for money?" I covered my mouth. I hadn't even remembered half of those moments. Grandpa smiled. Character isn't revealed during life's biggest moments. It's revealed during the thousands of tiny moments when no one is watching. He paused. The room felt impossibly quiet. This trust isn't a reward. It's a responsibility. If Rachel accepts it, I know none of you will ever go hungry. But if Linda controls this money, there won't be anything left for the next generation. He leaned forward one last time. I've spent 83 years learning one lesson. Never leave wealth to the person who wants it most. Leave it to the person who treats it as a tool instead of a prize. The screen faded to black. No one moved. The silence was unbearable. Finally, my father looked at my mother. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Linda, did you lie to me too?" She didn't answer. He asked again. "When you told me Rachel lost her college fund, Grandpa had already paid for it?" My mother stared at my father. She looked like she wanted to speak, like she wanted to explain everything. Instead, she sat down, very slowly. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. My father wasn't angry. Not yet. He was still trying to make the facts fit the woman he'd spent 29 years loving. "You told me," he swallowed hard, "that Rachel had to take out student loans because there wasn't enough money left." Linda nodded almost automatically. Her voice cracked. "I thought there wasn't." Thomas quietly slid another document across the table. The paper listed every tuition payment, every semester, every invoice. Every payment had come directly from my grandfather's account, not from my parents, not from loans. Grandpa had even paid the interest on the small student loan I'd insisted on taking because I didn't want to burden him. I stared at the documents. "I didn't know." Thomas smiled gently. "He asked the university not to tell you. He wanted you to believe your education came from your own hard work. It did. He simply removed the obstacles." I looked down at the table. That sounded exactly like Grandpa. He never wanted credit, only results. My father rubbed his forehead. He looked at Linda. "What happened to all the money we earned?" Linda finally looked at him. I made mistakes. He nodded. I know. I've made mistakes too, but mistakes don't add up to $400,000. No one interrupted him. He continued quietly. Did you ever plan on telling me? Linda closed her eyes. I thought I could win it back. The sentence landed like a brick. She kept talking before anyone could respond. The first few times, I actually did. I won. It felt easy. So when I lost, I believed I could recover it. I just needed one good weekend. Thomas sighed softly. According to the records, you said that for nearly 12 years. Linda didn't argue. Because she couldn't. Every statement, every receipt, every transfer, every lie was sitting inside those folders. My father leaned back in his chair. He suddenly looked 10 years older. I canceled vacations. I worked overtime. I sold my motorcycle. I refinanced my retirement account. His voice grew quieter with every sentence. I thought we were surviving. He laughed once. A short, empty laugh. We weren't surviving. We were feeding an addiction. No one looked at my mother, not because we hated her, because we didn't recognize her anymore. Thomas waited another minute before speaking. There is one more thing. My mother looked up immediately. No, there can't be. There is. He reached into the final folder. This was delivered to me 6 months before Walter passed out Lawye. He placed a sealed envelope in front of me. Again, not in front of Linda, not in front of my father. Mine. I hesitated. Should I open it? Thomas nodded. He wanted you to read it aloud. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. Rachel, if we've reached this part, then your mother has probably admitted enough for your father to understand what happened. If she hasn't, the documents will. Either way, please remember something. Addiction explains behavior. It does not erase responsibility. I stopped reading for a second. Grandpa always knew exactly how to say difficult things. I continued. When I was young, I believed love meant protecting people from consequences. I was wrong. Real love sometimes means allowing consequences to arrive. Otherwise, nothing changes. I looked up. No one moved. I kept reading. Your mother will probably think I'd punished her. I didn't. I protected what remained. There's a difference. If she accepts help, help her. If she asks for money, do not give it to her. Pay her bills, buy her groceries, cover her medical care, but never,
Ever.
hand her cash. She isn't being punished. She's being protected from herself. I lowered the letter. My mother was crying quietly, not dramatically, not loudly, just crying. My father looked at Thomas. Is there treatment? Thomas nodded. There are excellent treatment programs. There are also financial guardianship programs for people recovering from gambling addiction. Linda looked embarrassed. I don't need a guardian, Thomas answered calmly. Every person struggling with addiction says that before they accept help, for the first time, she didn't argue. Instead, she whispered something so softly I almost missed it. I'm tired. The room became silent again. Not awkward, not tense, just quiet. I realized something then. For years, I'd imagined this moment. I imagined exposing my mother, watching her finally admit everything, feeling victorious. Instead, I felt sad, not because she had been caught, because I realized I'd already lost the version of my mother I kept hoping would come back. Maybe years ago, maybe long before Grandpa started writing checks, maybe before I was even old enough to notice. Thomas closed every folder. I'll give your family a few minutes. Then he stood. I'll be outside. The conference room door closed behind him. None of us spoke. Nearly 5 minutes passed. Finally, my younger sister, Megan, broke the silence. I didn't know. She looked directly at me. I swear I didn't. I believed her immediately. Because Megan had never asked Grandpa for money. She had simply believed the stories Mom told us. that we were always one unexpected bill away from disaster. She looked at our father. Dad, were we really okay all those years? He nodded slowly. We should have been. Megan looked back at Mom. So all those birthdays, when you said we couldn't afford presents, Grandpa had already helped? Linda nodded without lifting her head. The Christmases? Another nod. The school trips? She nodded again. The year Rachel worked 2 jobs because you said tuition had gone up. Linda finally looked at me. I'm sorry. I smiled sadly. They're just words, Mom. She closed her eyes. I know. And for the first time in years, she truly sounded like she did. The rest of that afternoon passed in a blur. Lawyers came and went. Assistants carried folders into conference rooms. Phones rang. Documents were signed. But I barely heard any of it. I kept staring at Grandpa's letter. One sentence refused to leave my mind. Real love sometimes means allowing consequences to arrive. For years, I thought Grandpa had been enabling my mother. Now I realized he had simply needed proof. Enough proof that no one, not even my father, could deny the truth when it finally came out. Thomas found me sitting alone outside the law office nearly an hour later. The downtown streets were beginning to empty. People hurried past with coffee cups and briefcases. Normal lives. Normal problems. Mine no longer felt normal. He sat beside me without saying anything, for a full minute. Finally, he spoke. Your grandfather used to sit on this exact bench. I looked over. Really? He smiled. Every time we had a meeting. He said the city reminded him how small one person's problems really are. I laughed quietly. That sounds like him. Thomas nodded. He was proud of you. I know everyone says that after someone dies. I'm not saying it because I'm supposed to. He talked about you constantly. I looked down. He never told me. He didn't think he needed to. Thomas folded his hands. He believed actions mattered more than compliments. That sounded painfully accurate. Grandpa rarely said he was proud. He simply showed up. Every birthday, every school play, every graduation, every heartbreak. He was just there. Thomas reached into his briefcase one last time. I have something else. I laughed. Please tell me that's the last envelope. It is? This one isn't legal. It's personal. He handed it to me. Grandpa's handwriting covered the front. Open this after everyone leaves. I slipped it into my purse. I think I've opened enough letters for one day. Thomas smiled. I'd agree. That evening, I drove to Grandpa's ranch. Not because I had to, because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. The house looked exactly the same. The old porch swing, the weathered red barn, the oak tree where Grandpa had taught me to change a tire before he ever let me learn to drive. The place felt alive, like he had simply gone into town and would be back before dinner. I unlocked the front door. The familiar smell hit me immediately. Coffee. Old books. Fresh cut cedar. Motor oil. Grandpa. I stood in the living room for nearly 10 minutes without moving. Every object reminded me of him. His reading glasses, his favorite baseball cap, the worn recliner where he'd fallen asleep every Sunday afternoon while pretending to watch football. I finally sat down. Only then did I remember the final envelope. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. No legal language. No instructions. Just Grandpa. Rachel, if you're reading this inside the ranch, then I guessed correctly. I smiled through fresh tears. You always came here when life became too loud. When you were 12 and your best friend moved away. You came here. When you failed your driver's test. You came here. When that boy broke your heart in college. You came here. I've always loved that about you. You never ran toward noise. You ran toward peace. Don't lose that. The world rewards loud people, but it desperately needs calm ones. I stopped reading for a moment. Outside, the wind pushed gently through the oak trees. Exactly the same sound I'd listened to as a child. I continued. There's something I never told you. When your grandmother died, I nearly sold this ranch. Everything reminded me of her. Every room hurt. Thomas convinced me to wait 1 year before making any decisions. He was right. Grief lies. It tells us to throw away the things we will one day be grateful we kept. If you remember nothing else from me, remember that. Never make permanent decisions during temporary pain. I wiped another tear away. That sentence alone was worth framing. Then I reached the last paragraph. One day, your mother may become healthy again. I hope she does. If that day comes, forgive her. Not because she deserves it, because carrying anger is exhausting. Forgiveness is not giving someone your trust back. Trust is earned. Forgiveness is simply putting down the weight you've been carrying. Those are two very different things. Love, Grandpa. I folded the letter carefully. Then I cried. Not because of the trust, not because of the money, because I knew, no matter how much I inherited, I would never receive another letter from him again. The sound of tires crunching across the gravel driveway pulled me back to reality. I looked through the front window. Dad's truck. He climbed out slowly. Not rushing, not smiling. He looked like a man carrying far more than his own weight. When I opened the door, neither of us spoke. He simply held out a paper grocery bag. I figured you hadn't eaten. I looked inside. Turkey sandwiches, potato salad, 2 bottles of iced tea. Exactly what Grandpa always packed whenever we spent the day fixing fences together. You remembered. Dad smiled faintly. So did you. We sat on the porch swing for several minutes. We just ate. Finally, he spoke. I failed you. I immediately shook my head. No.
I did.
I believed every explanation. I believed every excuse. I thought I was protecting your mother. He stared across the fields. The truth is, I stopped asking questions because I was afraid of the answers. I had never heard my father admit something like that, not once. I should have noticed you work in 2 jobs. I should have wondered why your grandfather always insisted on paying bills himself. I should have realized something wasn't right. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was a good husband. I wasn't paying attention. I placed my hand over his. You were being lied to, too. He looked at me. Maybe, but I was still your father. I should have seen you. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sun slowly disappeared behind Grandpa's fields. Finally, Dad broke the silence again. Your mother agreed to treatment. That surprised me. So soon? He nodded. I think seeing the documents and hearing your grandfather finally broke through. I wasn't sure whether to feel hopeful or cautious. Dad seemed to read my mind. You don't owe her forgiveness. You don't owe her trust. You don't owe either of us anything. He looked toward the old barn. But if she truly changes, I hope you'll at least leave the door unlocked. Not open. Unlocked. There was the difference. And somehow, that felt like the wisest thing anyone had said all day. The next few weeks passed more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming matches, no surprise visits, just silence. For the first time in years, our family wasn't pretending everything was fine. We were finally dealing with reality. Linda entered a residential gambling recovery program 3 days later. It wasn't court-ordered. No one forced her. She signed herself in. Before she left, she asked if she could speak with me. I wasn't sure. Dad told me I didn't have to. Thomas reminded me I wasn't responsible for managing her emotions anymore. In the end, I agreed, but only for 15 minutes. And only in Thomas's office. She looked different, not healthier. Smaller. Like someone who had finally stopped carrying a lie too heavy to hold. She sat across from me without makeup, without expensive jewelry, without the perfectly rehearsed smile she'd worn for most of my life. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I don't expect you to forgive me? Good. She nodded. I don't deserve it. Another long silence. Then she reached into her purse. I brought something. She slid an old photograph across the desk. I picked it up. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. I was 8. Megan was 4. Dad had barbecue sauce all over his shirt. Grandpa stood behind us laughing. Mom was holding me on her hip. She looked
Happy.
not pretending, actually happy. I kept this in my wallet. She looked at the picture instead of me every day. I frowned.
Why?
Because I kept telling myself I wanted that family back. She laughed quietly. The problem was, I thought money would somehow bring it back. I stayed silent. She continued, the first time I went to a casino, I won almost $3,000. I thought I'd found the answer. She looked embarrassed. I told myself I'd surprise everyone. I'd pay bills. I'd replace everything we'd lost. What I didn't realize was that I hadn't solved a problem. I'd created one. She took a deep breath. I spent 12 years chasing that first win. I believed her, not because she deserved my trust, because every addiction counselor I'd ever heard described the exact same pattern. 1 win, 100 losses, a lifetime trying to get back to the beginning. I have a question. She nodded immediately. When Grandpa gave you money, did you ever intend to use it for us? Tears filled her eyes. The first few times,
Yes.
she answered without hesitation. I'd cash the check. I'd pay 1 bill. And then I'd think, maybe I can double what's left. So we'd have even more. She laughed through tears. I never doubled anything. I only made the hole deeper. I looked at the photograph again. When did you realize you couldn't stop? She didn't answer right away. When your grandfather stopped giving me cash, that surprised me. She noticed. I wasn't angry because he stopped trusting me. I was terrified. I realized I couldn't gamble anymore. And instead of seeing that as freedom, I saw it as losing oxygen. She wiped her eyes. That's when I knew I was addicted. She looked at me carefully. I don't want money anymore. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled sadly. I know. You don't believe me. No, I wouldn't either. She nodded. That's fair. She stood, then stopped at the door. I spent years believing your grandfather took everything away from me. She looked back. He didn't. I gave it away myself. Then she left. A month later, Thomas called. There are a few trust matters we need to review. I drove to his office expecting another stack of legal documents. Instead, he placed a ring of old keys on the desk. I recognized them immediately. Grandpa's ranch, the machine shed, the old workshop, the barn, the grain silos, everything. They're yours now. I stared at them. I don't know what to do with all this. Thomas smiled. Neither did Walter. What? He inherited almost nothing. I blinked. I thought the ranch had been in the family forever.
It has.
But barely. He opened another file. In 1978. Your grandfather almost lost everything. Drought. Debt. Failed crops. He worked 3 jobs while rebuilding the ranch. He never told anyone because he didn't want his grandchildren to think success arrived all at once. I smiled. That sounds exactly like him. Thomas nodded. He wanted you to understand something. What? Wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you protect. Over the next several months, I spent almost every weekend at the ranch. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I repaired fences, repainted the barn, restored Grandpa's workshop. I even found his old toolbox exactly where he'd left it.
Inside.
Every wrench had been carefully labeled in his handwriting. One afternoon, while cleaning a cabinet in the workshop, I found something unexpected. A small wooden box. My name was written across the lid. Just one word. Rachel.
Inside.
There wasn't jewelry, or cash, or another legal document. Just a folded piece of notebook paper.
It read,
If you're reading this, then you finally cleaned the workshop. I laughed out loud. Even after his death, Grandpa was still teasing me. Below it he had written, "Take care of the ranch. Take care of your family. Don't confuse those two responsibilities." Sometimes protecting your family means telling them no. It took me 70 years to learn that. I'm hoping it only takes you 30. I folded the note carefully, then slipped it into my wallet, not because it was valuable, because it reminded me that wisdom often fit on a single piece of paper. 6 months after the funeral, the trust held its first annual review. This time, no one argued, no one yelled, no one demanded money. Linda had completed 6 months of treatment, she attended weekly counseling, she hadn't touched a casino or an online betting app. According to her counselor, she was doing well, not cured. Recovery didn't work that way, but honest. For the first time in years, she was honest, and somehow that was worth more than any check Grandpa had ever written. 1 year later, I stood in the middle of Grandpa's ranch with a cup of coffee in my hands. The sunrise painted the fields gold, exactly the way he used to describe it. The sun never asks permission to shine, he'd always say. It simply does. For the first time since his funeral, the ranch felt peaceful again, not empty, peaceful. Life had settled into something that finally resembled normal. The rental properties generated enough income to maintain the trust. The investment portfolio continued to grow. Nothing extravagant, nothing risky. Exactly how Grandpa would have wanted it. Thomas and I met every quarter to review everything. Every dollar had a purpose. Scholarships, property maintenance, taxes, emergency reserves. No surprises, no secrets, no missing money. I had learned something unexpected. Managing wealth wasn't glamorous. It was mostly spreadsheets, phone calls, insurance renewals, replacing broken water heaters, negotiating roof repairs. Grandpa used to laugh whenever people called him rich. They only see the harvest. They never notice who fixes the tractor.
Now, I understood.
Dad started visiting every Saturday. At first, we worked in silence, replacing fence posts, repairing gates, changing the oil in Grandpa's old pickup. Eventually, the conversations became easier. One afternoon, he looked over at me while tightening a bolt. "You know, I spent years thinking being a provider meant earning money." He tightened the wrench one last time. I finally realized, sometimes providing means paying attention. I looked at him. I wish I'd learned that sooner. I smiled. "So do I." Then I handed him another wrench. Neither of us needed to say anything else. Megan surprised everyone. She declined the expensive wedding she'd been planning. Instead, she and her fiancé got married in a small ceremony under the old oak tree at the ranch. Only close family attended. After the ceremony, she walked over to me. "I need to tell you something." "What?" She laughed nervously. "I almost hated you." That caught me completely off guard. When Grandpa's lawyer called, "I thought he loved you more." She looked down. I was jealous.
I kept thinking.
"Why Rachel?"
I waited.
Then I read Grandpa's letter. "You know the one he left for me?" I nodded. "He didn't leave me money. He left me advice." She smiled. "He told me, never measure love with a calculator." She laughed. "I've been doing exactly that my whole life." She hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry." I hugged her back. "You don't have anything to apologize for," she whispered. "I know, but I wanted to anyway." Linda wasn't invited to the wedding. That wasn't my decision. It was Megan's. Recovery didn't erase consequences. Some wounds needed more time. Linda understood. She sent a handwritten card instead. No guilt, no manipulation, just one sentence. "I hope one day I earn another chance." Nothing else. No excuses, no requests, no mention of money. I kept the card, not because everything was forgiven, because it was the first honest thing she'd written to any of us in years. About 18 months after Grandpa passed away, Thomas called unexpectedly. I found something. My stomach immediately tightened. What is it? You should come to the office. Is something wrong with the trust? No. He laughed. Quite the opposite. When I arrived, a dusty cardboard box sat on his desk. I was cleaning out Walter's storage unit. He rented one? Apparently. He smiled, and he forgot to tell anyone. Inside were dozens of photo albums, home videos, letters, old cassette tapes, even my elementary school drawings. I laughed. He kept these? Thomas nodded. He kept everything. Near the bottom of the box, I found a small cassette labeled Rachel, age 10. Thomas looked around his office. I think I still have an old cassette player. A few minutes later, the tape crackled to life. Then, Grandpa's voice, if you're hearing this. Thomas finally found the storage unit. I burst into laughter. Thomas did too. I knew he'd say something like that. Grandpa chuckled on the recording. I figured I'd hide one last surprise. Then another voice appeared. Mine. Tiny. High-pitched. Dad says I'm too little to drive the tractor. Grandpa laughed. Your dad is probably right. But one day, this whole place won't need someone strong. It'll need someone kind. Little 10-year-old me answered immediately. I can already do kind. The tape ended. Neither Thomas nor I spoke. Finally, he smiled. I think Walter knew exactly what he was doing. That evening, I drove back to the ranch alone. I sat on the porch swing, the same one Grandpa and I had shared hundreds of times. The sun slowly disappeared behind the hills. Just before dark, a familiar pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Linda stepped out. She looked healthier, older, quieter. She stopped halfway to the porch. I know I should have called. I nodded. You probably should have. She smiled awkwardly. I'll leave if you want. I thought about it, then shook my head. You can sit. She sat at the opposite end of the swing, not close enough to touch, just close enough to talk. For several minutes, we watched the sunset. Finally, she spoke. 1 year. I nodded. 1 year. I haven't gambled. I'm glad. She looked toward the fields. I used to think recovery meant getting my old life back. It doesn't. It means building a new one. I smiled slightly. That's probably healthier. She nodded. It is? Another silence. Then she laughed softly. You know what the strangest part is? What? I don't miss the casinos. I miss lying. I looked at her. She noticed my confusion. Lying made me feel safe. I could always pretend tomorrow would fix today. She shook her head. Now I have to live with today's decisions. It's terrifying. I answered honestly. It probably should be. She smiled. I know. Then she reached into her jacket pocket. I brought this. She handed me Grandpa's old pocket watch. I found it while cleaning. I almost kept it. She looked ashamed. Old habits. I turned the watch over. His initials were engraved inside. WB. I think he'd want you to have it. She nodded. I think so too. She stood, then paused before walking away. Rachel. I looked up. Thank you. For what? For protecting me from myself. She got back into her car. This time, I believed she meant it, not because she'd said the right words, because for the first time in my life, she hadn't asked me for anything. 3 years later, the Walter Brooks Community Scholarship had helped 64 students attend college. The ranch employed 12 local workers. Every rental property was fully restored. The trust had grown instead of shrinking. People often asked me what it felt like to inherit millions. I always gave the same answer. I didn't inherit money. I inherited responsibility. Most people smiled politely. They didn't understand. Grandpa never wanted to make me rich. He wanted to make sure his life's work survived him. And maybe that was the greatest inheritance anyone could ever leave. Because money eventually runs out. Character, if you're lucky enough to learn it, can last for generations.